Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Southerners Northern Gardens. So you know what time it is. It's seed starting season, which is really exciting. I was really ready to enter winter and take a quick break, but now that January has hit, I'm ready for spring again, and we still have several months. So this is the months that the gardener typically focuses on seed starting, if you're into seed starting, or planning for the coming years. So today I'm going to be planting my Maverick Salmon geraniums, which I have a video on this from last year, which is very similar. I'm changing a few things up this year, but I'll discuss that with you. So these seeds came from Stokes Seeds, but if you watch my previous video, you know Stokes no longer sells to the consumer. They're a wholesale or became a wholesale seed seller. So if you Google geranium seeds, this is specifically the Maverick variety, you will find several locations to purchase them from. My recommendation is just pick the cheapest one, or as I mentioned in my previous video, go to your big box store and pick up open pollinated geranium seeds. They will grow perfectly fine for you, germinate just as well. That's what I grew my first year. But because I'm into certain color schemes in my garden, I've started picking a specific variety for the past 3 years. So this will be my 4th year starting geraniums from seed, I believe. And so first thing we're gonna do is go over the seed starting mix that I use, which is very similar from year to year. If you watch my last year video, you know that I use Pro Mix as my non-soil base in my seed mix. This year I am running low on Pro Mix, but I had some Coco Core. Essentially, you just want a non-soil mix. So peat, which if you're not into using peat, you can use alternatives such as Coco Core, which is fine. Coco Core in some instances has a lower pH. I haven't found that to be an issue starting seeds or anything, so I used this last year as well. I picked it up from Costco online. You know, those big retailers like Costco and Sam's Club are some of my favorite places. Like I got all my grow lights and seed starting shelf from Sam's, and then I recommend, you know, garden gloves and all sorts of other things that Costco sells in the spring for gardeners. But Costco specifically had this Coco Core online, and I purchased it last year. So I have one entire block, and they come as compressed blocks, and they're really difficult to get apart. You essentially have to soak them in water for a really long time. So because I soaked this one last year, it's already nice and fluffy for me, and I just put it in a big container, like a moving box, the plastic moving boxes, and that's where I store all of my materials until the next year or whenever they're needed again. So you basically want your non-soil mix here, so Pro Mix, peat moss, Coco Core, or something similar that you would grow in. You can also use, of course, the Jiffy seed starting mixes. I don't have anything against those, but when you're starting seed in such a large volume, that you may be expensive to use that route. So creating your own mix is perfectly fine, and I would highly recommend it if you're growing lots of seeds. So the second part of the mix is perlite. Perlite can also be found at your big box store, Lowe's, Home Depot. I believe I got mine at Menards, or I may have ordered it online. I can't remember. It's been sitting in a really big container for the past couple years, and I just use it for seed starting mix solely. And then vermiculite. So vermiculite and perlite are not the same thing, and I've gotten certain questions on those. They both hold a little bit of water, but perlite itself is more a drainage material. So what you want to do is think of perlite as aerating the soil and providing some loftiness to your soil starting mix so the roots can grow and develop really easily. And then vermiculite, you think of water retention. So vermiculite will hold 3 to 5 times its weight in water. And I picked this up the other day at Menards as well. It's a very fine horticultural grade vermiculite, and it was a very big container of it that'll last quite a long time, and I think it was $16. So you'll spend a little more buying these things individually up front, but they will go very much further in your seed starting and last you a couple years potentially, depending on how many seeds you're starting. So your ratio, if you want to call it that, is 2-1-1. So essentially I put 10 scoops of Coco Core in here, 5 scoops of perlite, and 5 scoops of vermiculite. So it doesn't matter how many scoops you put, just kind of use that ratio. If you need a little more drainage, add some more perlite. If you need a little more water retention, you can add a little more vermiculite, but that's kind of the ratio you want to go with. Now that we've got that out of the way, this is the basic mix. You can start anything with this. I'm going to talk about a couple additives that I add to my ornamental and vegetable seed starts, and that is Mosquito Bits, number 1. This will go in both my vegetable seed starts, tomatoes, peppers, that type thing, and all of the ornamentals that I start, including these geraniums. So Mosquito Bits is an organic product. It's basically corn coated with Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a natural bacteria found in the soil that kills mosquito larvae, and it also happens to kill fungus gnats. So if you're a beginner gardener, you probably struggled with fungus gnats. This does not kill the adults. This only kills the larva. So if you buy your seed starting mix from the store, sometimes when you get it home and you get it wet, there may have been some fungus gnat larvae in there, so this will help neutralize and kill that larva off. You will need a yellow stickies, essentially what they are, to control adult flies if you want to go an organic method. I actually have a large roll of yellow sticky tape because it's cheaper, and you can actually cut it off if you need to, but I essentially hang up the entire roll in my seed starting space. I'll put a link to that down below. You can buy the little tabs, but they're much more expensive and they don't go very far. So I just use it like a giant paper towel roll. I pull down the sticky, and when it gets done, you cut it off and pull down more. And they're attracted to that yellow color and get stuck, and that's the easy way to deal with adults organically. So for my seed starting mix, I don't have a certain amount of mosquito bits that I put in there. I just want it to look, pretty good amount. So you can see what I'm putting here, just a nice little layer on top. It doesn't take too much, but if you do have any fungus gnat issues, and all of these products here, including this cocoa core, has been sitting dried out for over a year in my basement, but just as a preventative, to make sure there's not going to be any issues there with fungus gnats, or if I do start getting issues and I have a fungus gnat in the basement for my other houseplants I keep down here, that will help neutralize, if they lay eggs in the soil, hopefully, some of that fungus gnat issue over the seed starting season. So the bag itself says it's effective for 14 days, but it kills larvae within 24 hours. So if you have any larvae in your mix, that will kill it off initially, and then it'll keep working for 2 weeks, and you can add more to the top of your seed growing medium if you need to, on top of the containers themselves. I haven't found that I've needed that. If you do have an issue, you can also soak this, I have found, in water for 15 to 30 minutes, and then pour the water over your seed starts, and that will help introduce some of that Bacillus thuringiensis back into the soil. So the other option that I add to my ornamental vegetables, all of them get this. Anything that I plant in containers gets this. You saw when I potted up my petunias into their containers last year, they also get this. This is Osmocote, and this is essentially what you will see when you go to a garden center and you see those green or yellow looking pellets on top of the soil of containers. Osmocote is a very similar product, and is a non-organic fertilizer, and it feeds for, I believe it says 6 months. It is a really, really excellent product, and I've used this since I started seeds, and then you can also use it for a houseplant fertilizer. I just really love it because it provides just enough fertilizer, so slow release as needed. It is activated by heat, not necessarily water, so you may get some benefit in your seed starting mix, but when you transition it out into your garden, those pellets will continue to feed the plant for several months after you get it in the garden. So I don't really have a specific amount that I add to my seed starting mix either. I think I used about 2 scoops last year. It just really depends on how many, what the ratio is you have here. So I put, as you know, 10 cups or 10 scoops of cocoa core. And so since I have a little more than I did last year, I think I'm going to add 3 scoops this year. And then what I'm going to do is just mix this up. So if you're interested in this container came from Amazon. I will link it below. It wasn't too expensive. There are some varieties or manufacturers that have them that are really expensive. If you don't have one, what I used last year in my seed starting video is a busboy container from Sam's Club. So you can go to Sam's Club and buy the plastic busboy containers, and I think that's like $15 to $20 for 2 of them. And I find they work really well, both as basins to hold containers in when you're seed starting and to mix stuff in as you need it. So you can drill holes into them to allow them to release some water, but just carrying stuff around the garden and around your seed starting area, they work really effectively. So I'm gonna mix this up with my hands. Okay, before you fill the containers up, you want to moisten your seed starting mix. The primary reason of this is so you don't get any dry spots in your containers when you fill them, and so that the soil settles really well initially in your containers and you don't have it sink later and then your seed gets upset before it germinates. So now that I've got this mixed up really well, just be cognizant of dust. Vermiculite and perlite is both really dusty. The coconut core can be as well, so if you want to wear a mask to do this mixing, certainly do that, or just mix it really slowly like I did and you won't get too much of a dust issue. In my basement I have a water hose, which is really effective to water all of my plants, and if you have a sink in your basement, like a laundry sink type thing, which is what I have and what I got installed specifically to start seeds, have your plumber come out and add you a hose spigot attachment to your sink. I'll try and take a picture and show you what mine looks like, but I can drag this hose, which is my 𝗣𝗢𝗗𝗘𝗢 hoses that I love so much, around my basement to water my seeds and my houseplants directly without carrying buckets of water. So we're gonna add some water here and get this moist, and I'll show you the consistency that it should be before you put it in your containers. All right, I think that's good. So essentially you want it, you don't want it dripping water, but if it holds together a little bit, you still want it kind of crumbly. That's moist enough, in my opinion, to get your seeds started. You'll water it, of course, after you get your seeds planted or placed in the containers, and then that will be good enough to get them started. You don't want to overwater it because you don't want to introduce mold or mildew really early in the process. So one thing I want to mention before I get to potting up my containers, I mentioned I add Osmocote fertilizer to my ornamental flower seeds. It is non-organic. If you want to add an organic fertilizer to your vegetable seeds, I would recommend you go with a water-soluble fertilizer and don't add anything directly in here like granules. I've made this mistake and it cost me dearly. If you add organic pelleted or granular fertilizer to your seed starts, you will have mold growing really quickly because you have to keep the seed bed moist for the seeds to germinate. And if you are growing seeds that take a while to germinate, that can cause fungus issues and then dampening off, and then your seeds just won't die shortly after germination. So be really careful, and I recommend don't add any organic fertilizer to your seed starting mix. You can water it with an organic water-soluble fertilizer after the seeds get going. The seeds have everything they need to get started. So if you want to choose an organic fertilizer, just wait until the seeds have germinated and are a couple weeks old, because they'll have all they need for a little bit, and then you can water it with organic fertilizer, a water-soluble organic fertilizer. So I'm going to set this to the side and talk a little bit about my growing containers that I use for seed starting. These are Bootstrap farmer containers. You've probably heard of them if you've been growing seeds for very long. I have a setup, and I started initially with just their 10 by 20 trays, which if you're used to buying 10 by 20 trays at your big box store to start seeds in, don't ever do that. They break really easily. I understand they're a little budget friendly, but you can't use them typically more than one season. They typically break just super, super easy. These are made of really thick plastic, and so I've been using these. I think this is my 3rd year. After the first year, I used those flimsy trays and decided I wasn't doing it again. So I started out initially with these trays, and that's all I purchased from Bootstrap Farmer because that's all my budget would allow that year. But you can see how tough these trays are right here. So they hardly warp. I've left them outside all season, unfortunately, and they still are non-brittle, which is really great. Last year, or the year before, so I think I've had these 3 years, so 2 years ago I upgraded to these containers right here, which you can purchase from Bootstrap Farmer separately, but they also come with a holding tray right here that you can purchase in addition to the individual trays. So you can actually stack these directly in here. They will shift a little bit and could fall over. So just to keep them really sturdy, I purchased these extra trays, and I don't have many of these, but they're great for seed starting specifically. And it also allows you to water your seeds really well. Keep them sitting in the container or to bottom water, and when you're done bottom watering, just lift out this tray and dump the water out of it. That way it has a dry bed there, and that's good. Now this setup is not necessary to grow your seeds. You can use yogurt containers. The first year I used little burpee growing containers, and those worked really well. They do not hold up well from season to season, so that's why I invested in something that works pretty well. The first year I grew geraniums specifically, I started them in the little cell packs that you can get from the big box store, and then I needed to pot them up because they quickly outgrew those cell packs. I think there may have been a 32 or 72 cell pack. It was kind of small. And then I planted them directly into like plastic solo cups that you can reuse from year to year and just drill a single hole in the bottom of them. That worked amazingly. So if you want to go that route and you need to save a little money, go buy your solo cups. The clear ones, I really like the clear ones. Some people say it affects the roots if you use the clear containers. I have not experienced that problem, and I've grown tons of stuff in those clear solo cups, and you can get them at Sam's Club or Costco for a great value. So if you want to reuse those from year to year, those also work really well. I may not recommend starting your seeds in those because it is kind of a big area, and if you're trying to start a bunch of them, because I'm specifically starting geraniums, so this will hold around 32 geraniums, it'll take up a lot of space to have those 4-inch average solo cups. So these I found are the perfect size, and they're roughly 2 by 2 to start the geraniums in, and also leave them in until they need to go out in late April or May. Another thing the Bootstrap farmer has is a greenhouse type dome for these, which also fits perfectly over these 10 by 20 trays. It has little vents in the top where you can adjust airflow in and out, and I have 2 of these and invested in 2 of those, and they have lasted 3 or 4 years as well, and they just work really, really well. So I'm not affiliated with Bootstrap Farmer, but I do love their products, and it's almost the only thing that I grow in and start seeds in now just because they're really durable and I really got my investment out of them. So when you're filling your containers, you just want to fill them up to the top, and you don't want to press the soil in too much because you want to leave some room or let the soil not be as compacted for the roots of these tiny plants you're starting to be able to get down into the soil easily. So that's why I really like the soil mix that I've made here. It's very lofty, and it's still, like you can see, very, very breathable for the roots and easy to grow in. So let me get all of these filled up and then we'll continue. All right, I'm done, and you can see how much soil I have left over here. So this will be used to grow any of the other ornamentals I choose to start this year, including the 𝗩𝗥𝗢𝗗𝗢𝗏 or anything else I bring you along for. I will be winter sowing a few things. I had some recommendations to sow 𝗧𝗛𝗦𝗧𝗦, or winter sow 𝗧𝗛𝗦s, and so I'll be doing that. And so I will know that this is for my ornamentals because I can see the little beads of Osmocote in here. Osmocote can be used in your vegetables as well. I just try and keep my vegetables and growing organically, and so I don't add anything that's not organic to my soil and seed starting medium. So I'm unsure of how many geraniums I have left. Last year I had a little snafu where I started my geraniums and I started having a fungus gnat issue almost immediately, probably because the seed starting mix or the pro mix may have had some fungus gnats in there. And I sprayed the seed starts a few days after they germinated with an organic chemical insecticide, and I killed off a lot of my seedlings and had to replant them. So I probably have enough to do this whole tray. If I don't, I may mix it up and do a different color, but it doesn't look like I do have enough seeds here, but we're going to start while we can. So I just put 1 seed in each tray or each cell. I don't worry about putting 2. I found that geraniums germinate really, really well for you. So Putting 2 is not necessary, and it'll just waste your seeds because you would need to cut one of those. And because geranium seeds aren't necessarily the cheapest seeds to purchase, unless you're buying them open pollinated, I would just recommend sowing the 1, and if one doesn't germinate in a few days, you can stick another one in the seed cell and it won't be that far behind, because I have found that geraniums germinate within just a couple of days. So you should get really good germination rates. And I'm going to have almost a whole tray actually, so that just shows you how far these seeds go. And it's just a tiny pinch of seeds, so I have enough to do this whole tray, which is good. So this is Maverick Salmon. The last year I grew Maverick Salmon, so these seeds are left over from there. I've also done Maverick Coral. Maverick Coral tends to be a little more orange than I like, and I actually want that coral color that we think of typically in the garden, and surprisingly that is Maverick Salmon based on their naming conventions. So now that I've got my seeds on there, what I've been doing for the past 3 years, because as I mentioned, I've had kind of some mold mildew issues as we get later into the seed starting season on things I've started, just because I tend to be an overwaterer. And then also to curb some fungus gnat issues and just mold and mildew in general, I top my containers with vermiculite. I've been doing that for 3 years. Vermiculite, as I mentioned, holds water really well, and so it will allow the top of the seed bed to stay really moist for germination, and that's one reason I don't fill my containers all the way to the top. You see I left a little bit of an area where I could top it with vermiculite, and that just covers the seed as needed, and then it prevents some of that mold or mildew formation as we get further along in the months, because these are the earliest seeds I start, so they'll be in here until late April or May, depending on how brave I am to put things out in my zone. And so we just want to top these a little bit. I mean, you don't want to put several inches of vermiculite on top, but don't worry about it too much. If you think you put a little too much, it'll be just fine. And then we'll spray this down. I like to spray it with a mister that I have, and I'll go grab that right quick. But you can see what I used there. I have a solo cup, and this is about all I used out of it, and it was completely full. So about 3/4 of a cup covered this entire tray. So let me go get my mister, and then we can mist this and get the seeds settled in and starting to germinate. So these little misters are what I like to have in my seed starting arsenal. You can pick them up a lot of places. I actually got this one at Ollie's for $5 on sale several years ago. And I just want to moisten the top of this vermiculite pretty well, and these misters work really well because they don't dislodge the seeds. So if I was to break out my water hose again, I might orient the seed where it's not as close to the middle, and it might grow a little funny. So we'll just keep this pretty moistened, and then we'll put the top on there. And in a few days, if you follow my Instagram, I will do a story when these start germinating. Typically, it's less than a week. I've seen them start germinating as early as 2 days later. So I'm going to get these under my seed grow lights. So I'll show you my seed starting setup later in the season. I need to get some things cleaned up first before I introduce you to the mess that's over there right now. I am one of those people who, after the seed starting is over, I kind of leave the mess until winter to clean up, because I need to move immediately to focusing outside and taking care of those things. So there's still some things I need to clean up from last seed starting season, but these will go on a heat mat probably. It's not necessary. My basement does stay a little cooler, so depending on what temperature you're growing these at, you may need a seed starting mat. It's probably not necessary. Like I said, I've grown peppers in my basement without a seed starting mat, so sometimes it helps speed up the germination rate and the growth of the roots and that type thing. So that's one reason I use it. Now, for geraniums specifically, I'm starting those today, January 23rd. You just saw me plant them. The seed starting packet says if you want blooms by May 10th, that they should be planted by December 20th. I am not interested in seed starting that early. That's just not for me. So essentially what I'm saying is if you want blooms earlier, you need to plant them earlier. If you're in a lower or a higher zone than me, lower in the United States, so zone 7, 8, 9, you might want to start them early in December because of course your last frost is going to be earlier than mine. So our last frost is right around the end of April, sometimes around May 10th, Mother's Day. So mine will not be blooming when I put them out, and they'll still be kind of small, but that's fine for me. I can get them out, don't have to worry about them getting damaged or having to pot them up specifically, because I do not like potting up containers inside. It's just really messy, and so I try to avoid that. So if you want blooms earlier, start them earlier. This has been a really good time frame for me, and I may not get blooms until around June, the early part of June, but that's about time when the rest of the garden is kicking in, and that gives me plenty of flexibility to get these out when I see fit. So that's about it, everyone. Seeds are really resilient. Like I said, these are seeds that I purchased last year, so it would have been probably December of 2020, November of 2020, and then I grew them last year, and then I have about 2 left, so if we don't have germination on a couple of them, I can drop an extra one here. But my goal is typically to wind up with around 30 geraniums that I can plant out in my front flower bed area. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about seed starting mix or starting seeds in general, drop them below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video with your friends. That's the best way to help my channel. If you want to purchase any of the products that I used in here, I'm not affiliated with Bootstrap Farmer specifically, or any of the other companies that I mentioned or brands that I mentioned in this video, but I'll drop a link below where you can purchase some of these items if you're interested in starting or adding those to your seed starting arsenal. And I'll talk to you soon. And remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Take care, everyone. Bye.